Okay, I think this is good. So, am I in the view, Teresa? Here?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So we are here on the hot seat with Teresa O'Neill. And as I've mentioned in other videos that I've recorded, I would have loved to do this as a live stream, but technical difficulties. Basically, Facebook live stream is blocked here where I am. And actually, we are graciously hosted by a startup here in Santa Clara, silos.com. So if you want to go check them out. But anyways, I want to thank them for allowing us to use this office or this meeting room to do the interview in it. The problem was that their internet provider is blocking Facebook Live. Their internet speeds for everything else is extremely fast, but Facebook Live is like the only thing that's blocked. So we didn't know that, and we're just having to make do with what we have. So I will upload these videos as soon as I get home. Aside from that, the format for these interviews is 3 parts. We're gonna begin with getting to know Teresa better on a more personal level, which includes an icebreaker game. So we're gonna have a little bit of fun with that. The second part is the pitch. So Teresa will have an opportunity to tell Santa Clara voters why they should vote for her, and if she'd like, she can go into her top issues. I say top 2, but I'm not going to cut somebody off if they want to go to 3 or whatever. That's okay. But she'll be able to tell us all why we should vote for her and go into detail on her top issues. And then the third part is the hot seat, where I get to ask the tough questions. There are 6 rules that I am having everybody strictly abide by. If I can look at them here to remind myself. Rule number 1, no time limit. So I will not at any point cut Teresa off or rush her to finish. She can talk for as short or as long as she'd like. Which these interviews have been going a lot longer than I had originally anticipated, but that's fine. Actually, I'm quite enjoying the conversation and learning a lot about the candidates. So rule number 1, no time limit. She doesn't have to worry about trying to wrap up her comments in 120 seconds or 90 seconds or 60 seconds, or I've even been in forums where you only get 30 seconds to answer. Rule number 2, it's a casual conversation. As you'll see, it will be a casual conversation. We'll get to talk. I'll get to challenge some thoughts. We may be debating some ideas. I can ask for follow-up. It's just a conversation that you would have with Teresa at any one of her coffee chats. Number 3, as you can tell in this small room, her opponent is not present, or her opponents are not present. So Teresa can be herself, or as much as herself as she would be, in having a casual conversation with me. 4th rule is the questions are going to be specific to Teresa. Now there are going to be some shared themes, maybe a few shared questions amongst the different, different candidates, or at least particularly for some for the same office. But the whole idea of the hot seat is that we get to ask Teresa questions that are specific to her, and that's what we're going to do. And that also helps ensure that people don't worry about who goes first or last in the interview process. Rule number 5, that the candidates are allowed to bring whatever notes that they want. There was some concern about the electronic devices, and depending on if the candidates of a certain seat are okay with it, I may allow it, but with the exception that I have to be able to ensure that they are not receiving answers, being fed to them over their electronic devices. Now, because this isn't live, obviously that's not possible at all. But we've seen instances where during a live forum or debate that some candidates were receiving fed answers or help from outside people over their electronic devices. So this isn't live, but again, and I don't see that Teresa is using any electronic devices anyways, and you'll see when I point the camera towards her, so that's not even an issue. And number 6, this is something that I'm holding very strictly. I will not interrupt Teresa for time, because rule number 1 is no time limit. Rule number 6, which is also one of the most important rules, is that the person I'm interviewing is not allowed to talk about their opponents. So I won't cut off for time, but I will interrupt and cut somebody off if they are, or steer them away from talking about their opponents. This opportunity on the hot seat is to get to know why you should vote for Teresa, not why you shouldn't vote for her opponent. So this is really the opportunity for the hot seat, and I think those rules are simple but fair. I think so. So with that, I'm going to move over to Teresa. Hey, Teresa, is the camera? Yes, and the camera is now focused. So we're going to start. tell people about yourself, or tell us all about yourself. You know, who's Teresa O'Neill?
Well, thank you, Hosam. So I guess that's the question that we all go through life struggling with. Who am I? So I am a native to Santa Clara County. I have spent basically my whole life here. I went to school, grew up in Santa Clara, went to Santa Clara Unified Schools, graduated from what was then Buxer High School. I was a scholarship student at Stanford University. When I was in school, not so much at Stanford, I was already in a little bit of burnout, but I was a very involved student, like in lots of student government and clubs and different organizations involved with my church and things like that. So after I graduated from Stanford, I had hoped to go into the field of communications. And so while I was looking for an opportunity to be in communications, I accepted a position with Hewlett-Packard. And I tell the young people, or the people of your age, that when I went to work for Hewlett-Packard at age 22 or 23, it was like going to work for Google now. It was the preeminent employer. And its culture and its heritage and its belief structure really meshed with mine, and they gave me a lot of flexibility to pursue my other interests. So after I'd been at HP a while, it was finding it was actually harder to make a transition back into like working in communications. So I focused a lot more on getting back involved in community, and once again through my parish community. And actually HP encouraged me, and I started working with groups like the United Way, things like that. I got back kind of very interested in what was going on in the Santa Clara School District. So in 1998, I ran for the Santa Clara Unified Board of Trustees, and I got elected. So I began my career as a public official then in 1998, and I served for 2 terms on the Santa Clara School Board. And I had a lot of people saying to me, you know, what's a single woman with no children running for the school board? And I told people, you know, it's because I cared really deeply about our community. I used to people say to me, how many kids do you have? And I'd say 14,000. My mother had
that number's probably grown since then.
Yes, up since then. But you know, when at the district at its peak, when I was going through the baby boom years, the district actually had like 25,000 kids at one point. So my mother had been a teacher in Santa Clara Unified, and I had been tremendously impacted by teachers that I had in school in Santa Clara. And actually I tell people I had much more impact on my life from the teachers I had in Santa Clara than I did at Stanford. I mean, they were wonderful, learned professors at Stanford and great people, but in terms of the impact that they had on my life, it was, I felt very much a draw to knowing what teachers, good teachers and support staff and administrators can do and helping the lives of children. So that it's still a very deeply held passion of mine. While I was on the school board, I also got involved in the County School Boards Association and the California State School Boards Association. I was president of the County School Boards Association. So I got to know people in a lot of other communities in Santa Clara County and what were the issues and challenges that they were facing their school districts, their children, their students and teachers and staff. And at the end of my second term, I really, really enjoyed working with the people in the school community. And one of the things that we kind of had a challenge about was that people felt there wasn't enough diversity on the school board. There had been, when I was a young person, there had actually been a lot more ethnic and racial diversity on the school board in Santa Clara. So even though I later told people when I was at HP, the best job I ever had was being on the school board in terms of, at that point, how people worked together, how collegial the board was, the communication with the staff and with all of the employees. And we had some really rough times, like major budget cuts at 2 different points during the time that I was on the school board. But I think that everybody felt that that we pulled together and worked together. So it was a satisfying work experience, kind of in that context.
Were you still with HP at the time?
Oh yeah, I was at HP the whole time, and actually used a lot of my vacation time to participate in a lot of the various school board activities. And I felt it was kind of interesting because I was able to bring some of the exposure that I'd had to really good management practice. I said one thing about being at HP, as long as I saw the best and some of the worst in management practices. So I was able to bring some of that experience, particularly at the time that I was on the school board. When the first 6 years I was on the school board, I was the only person who really worked like in the corporate world, who had any kind of background like that. Yeah. So I felt like I kind of said, let me tell you how things work in the larger world here, in terms of some management practice and budget practices. So I was really particularly interested in a lot of the curriculum issues and making sure that every student was getting their needs met, whether they were a special education student, whether they were a migrant student, a student coming in that didn't have any English skills, or whether they were more of what we call now like a kind of a gifted student, whether were we providing the opportunities for them. And I also found it very fascinating to try to understand how schools were financed, which is in California still rather Byzantine, but I think it's improved since it was at that point. But as I said, at the end of 8 years, I felt that I had been working at that point. I had made some inquiries to try to change the way that Santa Clara Unified was electing school trustees, and had uncovered some very interesting information. And at the time, talking with the County Office of Education, they felt that the only way that we would be able to make a substantial change in that method of how board members were elected would be to have an election. We'd have to have another special election. And the cost of that election at a time when we had been going through lots of budget things. So I said I didn't think that was practical. So I said, all right, okay, I won't run again. And so my friends were just like, what are you talking about? You're not going to run again.
Because there are no term limits on school board.
No term limits on school board members. And I said, I think that I would probably get elected again. I think I've been doing a good job, and I'm responsive to the community, and I think I think people felt that I was a good listener and sincerely cared. And even though I was this anomaly of a single person without kids in the school district, so I did. I went out and tried to recruit people to run for my seat, and it didn't quite work out the way I had hoped. We won't go into that. So then I finished my 8 years on the board, and shortly after that, I had a couple of my mentor figures, and one of them was Aldith Parle, who died about a couple years ago, who was a very dear friend, and as I said, one of my mentors. And we had started working together when I was on the school city liaison committee, and she was on the city council, and I represented the school board. And we had done a lot of, some work together on some various projects, and she was very helpful to me. And she really wanted me to get involved with the city, which I hadn't really had that intention. And so there was going to be an opening on the planning commission. So she was talking to me about it. I said, okay, I'll apply for the planning commission. I said, I didn't really think that I would get selected. Just kind of the way that sometimes the politics of how some of those kind of commission selections go. But I set about, like I do for most things, I tried to really prepare. I went out and talked to council members. I had some exposure to CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, by being a board member and a lot of the bond projects that we were doing. So I had exposure to land use. We had worked with the city on the development of the Rivermark area. So I thought, okay, I have some insights into this. This might be something where I could contribute, show the benefit of some of my experience. So I was very surprised, but I got appointed to the planning commission.
On your first attempt.
Yeah. So I kind of, and right off the bat, that was at a point that was in 2007. So we were still in sort of the .com bubble burst recovery, and we had a lot of interesting projects that came before the city at that point, and including a couple of the big ones that I didn't support, like the 900 Kylie project. That project ended up getting disapproved by, voted down by the Planning Commission 7-0 when we were overruled by the City Council.
Wow.
And I got involved with the whole issue of the Barrett property over on Winchester Boulevard, which I'm still working on to try to get affordable housing on the parcels that are remaining. So at that time, it was Frank Barcells and myself, God rest his soul, that were kind of leading the charge for that project to be kept, to have a more significant piece of it be open space. And then the economy started imploding, and some of the projects that had been approved, including the Yahoo project, and for years we just had projects that went on hold, and nothing much was happening. And then it was kind of interesting. The big project that came around that it was incredibly controversial in the community was the proposed football stadium.
Yeah.
And so the Planning Commission got fairly involved with that, and and a lot of some of the force behind that was in light of all these other projects that had been canceled, and particularly pleas from the building construction trade workers, who were, some of the unions had 40% unemployment. There was a little bit of desperation. So the Planning Commission didn't really look at economic, economic issues really aren't in our purview, but in the background that was one of the issues, and also that it was purported that it would really benefit the schools. So that was one of the very interesting projects that came up at that time. So kind of fast forward, I made what I call a quixotic run for council in 2010, because at that time the person who I ended up running against had already served quite a lengthy period of time on the council, and I was hearing a lot of people say they didn't want her to run again, and nobody would run against her. So literally on the last day of the filing period, I said, all right, I'll do it. And so, I mean, with no preparation, no anything, it's just that it was thought, okay, that that it wouldn't just be a walkover. And actually that was a kind of a real learning experience, and I think people were surprised at how, that I got as many votes as I did, considering that we started so late.
Yeah.
And then I continued to serve on the Planning Commission for a couple more years. I've also had a lot of work on various nonprofit boards. Like for 20 years I was involved with the Walk for AIDS and involved with AIDS issues, particularly around providing funding. I was particularly interested in education so that we could continue to have ongoing prevention activities, and I really felt that by just keeping people educated as to the issues, that we could prevent a lot of problems. And it was, I was so pleased that in the time that I was involved, it certainly wasn't any of my efforts, but we went through going from seeing AIDS as almost a certain death sentence for people that we knew that had contracted the virus, to most people being able to live a much longer lifespan. And as the drugs have improved, at least, at first the drugs were very, very damaging, but that was fulfilling to see the progress that we made in that area. I've also been on the board of the Triton Museum of Art, some various educational groups. For 25 years, whatever, was involved with the United Way on grant-making strategies, looking at needs assessments, what were the most important areas. Particularly some of my areas of interest were health, and things such as the Emergency Assistance Network, which I still feel like we have serious gaps in that area in Santa Clara. So that's a project that I'm still kind of working on, is trying to get more complete emergency services for residents of Santa Clara to prevent them from entering into possible homelessness. So in 2012, I thought about it. I had been very torn, and actually a couple of friends did convince me to run for council in 2012, and with the help of many just average people in Santa Clara, and in spite of being vastly outspent in that race, I think it was the residents, I hope, picked up on my sincerity and my wanting to make a difference in our community, and that I had a history of wanting to be involved and to help make everybody's life better, and to make sure that they had access to government, and their government was meeting their needs in a way that made their lives better. So I was very honored and pleased to be elected in 2012, and I believe that I've made a difference in my 4 years on the council, And I work, I think, very hard. I ended up leaving my job at HP.
While on council?
Yeah, about a year and a half ago. Because of we needed more help on a lot of council committees, and there were key roles such as who was going to be the liaison for a lot of our electric utility issues. Pat Kolstad had done it for a long time, and he wanted to be to rotate out, and there was nobody else who was willing to do it. And so I ended up taking a early retirement package so that I could step in and help the city by representing us in some of those issues. And so I have gotten quite involved with a lot of legislative issues involving our public utilities and having clean power, which is and it's a huge financial benefit to Santa Clara and a magnet for economic development, and it's a key component of our climate action plan and our hopes to reduce greenhouse gas emission coming from our community of Santa Clara. But I'm involved in lots of different communities. I represent Santa Clara on the board of Valley Transportation Authority, which is has a lot of pluses and minuses. I'm pleased with it. I think that the board and the general manager that's been there a couple of years were getting into issues that have been problematic with VTA and are making management corrections and things like that. I think in Santa Clara we're starting to make a lot of improvements in some of our processes. I think things had gotten really out of date, kind of out of touch with more the current practices. And we're starting to make changes, and oftentimes with any bureaucracy it takes a while to start to turn the aircraft carrier in the bay, or in those cliches that are used about that. So other than to say a little bit about me, otherwise
What's something that most people don't know about you?
Well, some people. Well, let's see.
Something you're willing to share.
Okay. Well, one thing is that a lot of people don't realize that I've been on several game shows.
Really?
Yes. So
tell me more.
Okay, so
that's interesting.
Yeah, when I was, I've always kind of had a reputation for having a good memory, and so when I was in college, I was on a show. You weren't even born, but I was on a show called Split Second. When I was my freshman year roommate and we'd come back from lunch. I had a little TV set that my parents had given me as a high school graduation present. And so we'd come back to our dorm room and we would put on All My Children, which I watched to its last day that it went off the air. And there was this game show.
I'm nodding, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay. You don't know about Erica Kane? Okay, Hosam, I'll have to explain to you American soap operas. So there was this game show that was called Split Second that came on, I can't remember if it came on right before or right after All My Children. Uh-huh. And it was like they had 3 contestants and they had questions, and the questions had 3-part answers, and depending on whether 1, 2, or 3 people got part of the question, you got points. Sure. And the thing at the end was they had cars up on the stage, and if you were the winner, you got to go up. And the first day they had like 5 cars. The first day, 1 out of your odds were 1 out of 5, and each day that you won, the odds got better. But if you went up there and turned the key, and if the motor started, you won the car. So my roommate used to sit there, and she had an interesting background herself, but that's another story. She said, "You ought to try out for this program. You can answer all these questions." Well, that summer we were having another of our periodic recessions in the United States, and I didn't have a job. I didn't get a job, so I wrote to that show, and to try to get interviewed as a contestant. So I went down to LA. So I was successful in getting interviewed. I was like one of their youngest people. Had just turned 19, but I looked like I was about 13 or 14.
That's hilarious.
And so bottom line on that, so I ended up after a couple of days, I did win a car. And
You're kidding?
No, I won a car.
What was it?
Well, it turned out to be not the car that I got, but...
it was just for show on TV?
That's a whole other story that I can tell you sometime about how I had to threaten to sue them for fraud. It was Monty Hall Productions, the company behind Let's Make a Deal, because they told right before you went out there, they said, well, you're not actually going to get one of those cars, because my mother was saying, oh my gosh, if she wins a car, one of us should go down there, fly down there to help her drive the car back. Yeah. Well, it turned out that no, you have to wait, and it turned into a very long saga.
Dealership, and then they changed their mind.
Detroit, and then the car that I won, they didn't make. So the bottom
Oh, my
line,
God.
and they knew that I was going to be going overseas to go to do some studies abroad, and I thought, oh, maybe they're just trying
They
to
tried to
string
cheat
me
you
out,
out.
you know,
Yeah,
or whatever. So the bottom line, though, it is I did end up with a Camaro, with a 350 V8 4-barrel carburetor, which a lot of my friends found funny.
I can't imagine you driving that.
Well, because even then I was known. I rode around the Stanford campus with I had a little like Stingray bicycle with a little butterfly handlebars and all of that. And so a lot of my friends thought it was very
Please
funny.
tell me you have a picture of you in the Camaro.
I have a car somewhere. My dad took a picture of me
Okay,
laying
good.
on the hood of the Camaro, and then the night before it only arrived like a week or so before I was going to go overseas to go to school.
Uh-huh.
So in a huge burst of sentiment, one of my brothers, and my parents had like a little farewell dinner for me, and so one of my brothers says, if her plane goes down over the Atlantic,
Who gets to keep it?
he
Yeah.
says, I get the Camaro. And I'm like, well, gee, thanks for all the sentiment and well wishes for my studies abroad. So that was one of my game show things. I tried out for a couple others, but actually on 2 separate occasions I've been on Jeopardy. And I was a winner
Really?
on Jeopardy.
No way.
Yes, I was a winner on Jeopardy. I did not become an undefeated champion, and that's a whole long story. But I actually met Art Fleming. This was early on, right when I was starting to work for Hewlett-Packard. And I had thought if I really made a lot of money, at that time they had a bonus. They kind of changed the
This
format.
is at HP, yeah? Or on Jeopardy.
Yeah, they on Jeopardy they had like a bonus
Yes,
where you
yes,
could
yes.
maybe get like $50,000.
Yes.
I was still trying to get like a job in communications.
Yeah.
So I thought if I get that, if I can do that, and if I can win that bonus, I won't take a permanent job with HP. I'll use the money to kind of fund myself while I try to get a job in communications. Well, so I won, and I won some money, but it wasn't enough not to go to work.
Right.
But I did use the money to help me with my mother to buy some real estate. So I had some money. And then some years later when I was working for HP, Jeopardy had been off the air and it came back on the air with Alex Trebek.
Yes.
So they had something that said if you're interested in being a contestant. So I called them and I said, well, some years ago, back when it was on CBS or whatever, I did. So they decided that I was eligible, and actually I did go down another time. They test fairly extensively for that show. And actually, for the split second show, they did quite a bit of testing, and I was actually at the time I was only on for a couple days, and that's a long story I can tell you about what happened. But I think I was like their biggest one-day winner at the time.
Wow!
And so at the time, this is 1985 or something like that. I think at that time I won like close to $17,000 in one day. So at that point, that was like the biggest somebody had done. I had taken a couple days off from work. People didn't know. I didn't really tell. Like only a couple of my friends knew.
You're just gone for work for a couple of days.
Well, we had some shut. That was, and once again, another recession. So we were having to take days off because rather than at that point, that was the old HP style. Rather than lay people off, everybody took a cut. And so, even though a lot of us worked, I'm sure as you can relate,
more than your
worked on the but so I had a couple days off. Nobody knew, So we drove down to LA.
Hilarious.
Actually, I still had the car. I drove the Camaro, that I had won on the first game show, and that's how we got down to LA and back was in the game show Camaro, and my friends didn't know that most of them, my work friends. So.
And they don't watch the show, or it was aired later?
Well, it wasn't live because they put it in
Sure.
sometimes there can be months of lag. Sometimes they film all those shows within 6 weeks or something like that. So I knew when it was going to be on. And I started getting phone calls from around the country. And email,
from friends, from people that knew who you were.
Yeah, there were groups of people that I knew. HP, like some friends of mine that worked for HP in Chicago. Every day they went in to eat lunch in a conference room. And they turned on the television and they watched Jeopardy. And so there they are eating their sandwiches, and they said, "From Santa Clara, California," and whatever my job title was at the time for a major electronics company in Silicon Valley, Teresa O'Neill. They all just were like, dropped their sandwiches and stuff. So like I said, it was very funny. I heard from people because the first time, I mean, it's funny that the reach of some of those shows.
Yeah.
So, so it was the
They weren't calling to tell you how they had a problem. They needed some help monetarily.
Well, at first it was congratulations, but one of my cousins did hit me up for quite a bit of money.
Oh, okay. We won't go into that.
We won't go into that, but I still love him.
So I know a game show contestant winner.
Yeah. So that's something that a lot of people don't know about.
Are you gonna apply for another game show at some point?
Maybe. The thing about it is, since then, I have been so focused on doing a lot of this community work that a lot of those shows have a lot of
useless knowledge that
or current cultural stuff.
Sure.
Actually, I tried out I got into the pool for Do You Want to Be a Millionaire or something like that, but I didn't get scheduled. Who wants to be a millionaire?
Yeah.
So, but I felt good because I did make it into the pool at least.
That's awesome. That is, I think, going to top it for the day in terms of things that people didn't know about the candidates. So, okay. Which was worth the extra time, but that is totally fine. No time limit. We're gonna play a little game. I'm gonna move the camera here. It's not one of your game show games, so It's not like that. But the way it is you're gonna tell me. Okay, so I have you in the screen in the picture. You're gonna tell me the first thing that comes to your mind, or the first thought that comes to your mind when you see whatever goes on the screen. Okay. It doesn't have to be like a. It's not like the first thing, and it's only got to be like a small statement or small, long. It doesn't matter. Just don't try to rig it to be more politically correct or whatever. Just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind when you see the picture.
Okay.
Okay. So let's try. Let's see. This is an interesting one for you. Let's try this one.
Optical illusions. Do you see the beauty, or do you see the hag kind of thing?
Okay, I wouldn't put it that
So the
way,
first one, that's what I say, the optical illusion. But actually, what I saw was the profile of of a young woman, and then when I looked at it for another second, I could also see that it could be
an old lady.
An old lady.
Okay. How about
intense? Those eyes. That's what speaks to me. I think is that Robert Downey Jr.?
That is him. Yeah.
So what strikes me is the intensity of his gaze.
Uh-huh.
And the very dramatic lighting from one side of his face to the other, and the light catching the iris of his eye that's almost in darkness.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me think, what's he thinking about right now?
Any favorite movies with Robert Downey Jr.?
Actually,
you mentioned that you weren't caught up on some of the
I
newer cultural
saw
stuff,
one of his Iron Man movies with a friend. Because that's one of the things here. I was a big movie lover. I wanted to be a film editor or in production, and actually drafted some screenplays and things like that. And now I can hardly have time to go to movies. Yeah. But I saw one where he was like isn't it Iron Man when he was so? And I think about him, and I think about his struggles with substance abuse and addiction. And it seems like he's really gotten his life back on. So that's one of the things I think about when I think about Robert Downey Jr. Well, my first reaction, now if it was only a Reese's peanut butter cup.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm not, and one of the things my dad used to say about me was, he said, she's rather an odd child. She doesn't really care much for candy or ice cream. I'll kind of eat them, but my grandmother would have loved both of those, but really, I'm not much of a candy eater if it's not like Reese's peanut butter cups.
Really? So that's your that's your kryptonite.
Yeah. Old Glory. Makes me think a lot about some of the controversy that what popped into my head about the national anthem and the Star Spangled Banner. And one of the things that I've thought for a long time is I would rather that our national anthem be America the Beautiful. So I think, I think about the flag, and I think that we all should have a lot of pride in our country and what we've achieved. we've got to realize how much further we have to go to live up to the ideals that are behind it.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting. That's deep.
The Mission City. This resonates with me on many levels. My dad was an alum at Santa Clara University, and I can remember being at the university, and particularly in the Mission Church, as a very small child with him during Mass on Sundays. And I said back on the days when they still allowed confession to go on during Mass. I have to tell you about all this deep Catholic stuff. Also, recently I was going through some old family photos, and I found a picture of my dad with my grandfather in the Mission Gardens, like from the late 1920s. So, and I am a Roman Catholic. I am a practicing Catholic. I say I'll have to be practicing to get it right. So the spiritual aspect of the represented by the Mission Church, it resonates very deeply with me. It's a core value of mine. I think so highly of the university. I think the university is such a tremendous asset for our community, and I think as the years go on, it's just going to be. I look forward to having us partner so much more, and I mean so that our residents can benefit from what the asset of having the oldest institution of higher learning in the state of California in our city. Levi Stadium. Of course, I also see right here, I see our soccer fields. Okay. So that's something that's very important to me. So Levi Stadium, it's kind of a little bit of a mixed bag feeling for me. I think that this can be, it's a very, it's a huge asset, and it takes up a lot of time to manage appropriately. It's one of the things that I'm very concerned about, is that we get the right financial processes and business practices in place to manage that asset, because whether we like it or not, it's here probably for the next 40 years. So we've got to make sure that it's an asset and not a liability to our city. And I think we have the ability to do that, and I hope that our partners, the 49ers, will want to see that it's equally beneficial for them as it is to us. So, I mentioned I went to high school here in Santa Clara, and at the time there were 4 high schools in the Santa Clara School District, and one of them was the Buxer Bruins, which is where I went, 3000 Benton Street.
Interesting. And
what happened after Proposition 13, and as the baby boom bubble went through the schools, there was, when I said at one point it was 25,000 students, so the enrollment started falling, and they merged some of the high schools. And so Santa Clara, you see that Bruin, that was our mascot when I was at Buxer. And Santa Clara, they wanted to keep the name Santa Clara High School because there has been a Santa Clara High School since 1872, one of the oldest public high schools in the state of California. So I have mixed feelings when I see that, because the blue and gold was the old Santa Clara High, and their mascot was the Panthers. So some of my friends don't like this at all. But and the Chargers, when I was there, it was the Wilcox Warriors. They were an arch rival. So I think about my own high school experience, what a great time I had. But I enjoy high school sports. Actually, I would rather go see a college game or a high school game than go to like a professional. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So learning a lot of new things about you today, Teresa. Let's do this one. By the way, I have a bunch of pictures, and I'm picking and choosing as I feel like it.
Santa Clara Weekly. Well, I think a local newspaper is a tremendous asset for a community. And back when I was on the school board, I used to talk to our then superintendent, Paul Perotti, about wanting to have a more robust weekly paper in Santa Clara, and used to say to me, watch out what you ask for, because then, a lot of times then the local, they're, one of the things that they have to pay attention to is the school board and the city council. I wish that the Santa Clara Weekly, there's some good writers there, they do some good things, that they could morph into being more of a web-based, kind of like an internet portal for Santa Clara. And there's many examples in other cities of. I love what this UC Berkeley School of Journalism is sponsoring a portal for Richmond I think it's called Inside Richmond, and they're really doing a lot of journalism, and being able to provide a lot more coverage of what's really going on in that sometimes troubled community. So when I see that, I think about what I wish the Santa Clara Weekly could become.
Is that possible, given the kind of readership and they have a big readership, but also a lot of people in Santa Clara, especially the older community, the older generation, wouldn't find going online to be quite easy or simple or something that they would prioritize?
Well, so you can still have both. I mean, there's speculation about how much longer will we have print editions of newspapers like the Mercury News, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal. I mean, how much, I don't know how much longer those are going to exist because of the production costs and the diminishing numbers of people who subscribe to the hard copy edition. I did notice I was at the Senior Center a couple of days ago for a meeting, and there were big piles of the weekly there. I think part of the issue with the weekly right now is that their distribution is, unless you subscribe, is maybe just a few thousand copies, because it's a lot of people say that only once in a great while do they get a copy delivered to their house. So so that kind of undercuts.
I think they've cut back. I think they do it every other week at least now.
Yeah, I mean, even say 6 weeks ago, I was getting, for some reason, I was getting the weekly just about every week at my house, and now I haven't seen it for over a month. Yeah, so I haven't seen it. So I think that they could maybe possibly do continue to do both, but I'm surprised that I had a friend of mine that passed away this spring. She was 99 years of age, and she would she used her computer. She emailed me. She did all kinds. So sometimes I'm surprised.
Some people are
right? But I wish that even right now nobody can comment on the website. It's a static website. There's a lot of limitations to it, and like I said, I think they've got some great people that are writing there. And I think that if they had a more flexible platform, that they could be posting things during the week, that they could...
As things happen.
Yeah.
Like that, as opposed to sure. Come on, first reactions, don't think about it.
Well, first of all, I hate to say this, I was thinking, what is that Boris? I wasn't sure, I was trying to figure out who that was exactly. Trump, that's just... I'm just speechless that, more than anything, that's the first face, and just because look at the expression on his face. That's the face that jumped out at me. And I am kind of I still can't believe that we're seriously considering him for president of the United States, or that at least some people are. So it scares me, more than any of the other faces, and particularly how his views towards women. And, I mean, just about if you look at the list, I mean, that's, so now he's a Republican, but when you think back about the Republicans that we've had in recent years, can you imagine George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush conducting themselves like Donald Trump? Can you imagine Ronald Reagan conducting himself that way? So I grew up in California in the time, even before Ronald Reagan was governor, when the Republicans in California were quite progressive. Whether you like it or not, the abortion laws in California changed with Ronald Reagan. That wasn't done under a Democrat. But we had the progressive movement really started, the whole growth of city managers as a form of government, the women getting the vote in California years before it happened at the federal level, initiative, referendum, recall. Those were all out of the progressive movement, which was really started promulgated through the Republican Party in California. Now, and people like David Packard were leading Republicans. So that's the first thing, because just the angle I'm sitting at.
Sure.
Hillary. I mean,
You don't have to go deal. That's just your first thoughts.
That was my first thoughts. That's basically, so I'd say about Hillary. Actually, I wasn't a supporter of hers in 2008, and actually I voted for Bernie Sanders, but I certainly encourage anybody out there, please vote for Hillary. Blue Pack. I don't know what to make of this. This is a mystery. And I find it also interesting that part of their symbol is an apple. I've been trying to figure out what is the significance. Why, in this, whoever's behind this group, did they choose to put an apple? Because obviously in our community, there's, having spent a lot of time with education, apples are frequently used as a symbol for people in education. Or in our community, the presence of, obviously, Apple computing, and I'm old enough to think of Apple Records with the Beatles. So I have tried to figure out why did they choose whoever's behind it to do that. And then I did see a little bit of the coverage about whether the San Francisco POA is a donor, and I thought, well, maybe the blue, instead of referring to Democrats, refers to police, because that's oftentimes
interesting.
That thought, I said, does Blue Pack mean some kind of pack for police issues or police causes? So I don't like when people are duplicitous, and I feel like using things like this are basically trying to be manipulative and keep information from people. So that I wish people didn't hide behind things like this. If you have something to say, come out and say it. Okay. I remember. I've seen this picture. I've seen this picture, and my thought is, boy, if you only knew what you were starting in motion. So I'm old enough to remember. So this is for those young people out there. This was a picture of the city council back in the 1960s when they started to demolish what was Santa Clara's downtown. So I'm old enough to remember, and actually in college I wrote a paper kind of about my memories of being 3 and 4 years old and going with my older brothers to the Santa Clara movie theater with the kiddie matinee back in.
So yeah, well, let me change the picture. So what happened, guys, is the video cuts off at about 45 minutes. Again, because it's not live streamed. So it just cut off just about a minute ago, and so I come back, and that's why you hear the chair creaking, because I come back every once in a while to see if the video's still recording. Anyways, rewind 60 seconds, Teresa, and finish your thoughts on this one.
Okay, so what I was going to say is, remembering the old downtown, and my favorite part of the old downtown was the Santa Clara movie theater. And obviously a very different time when your parents felt comfortable, and me being 3 or 4 years old, sending me off to the movies with my brothers. And I loved going to the movies in downtown Santa Clara and all the fun things that we had, and there were businesses and restaurants and drugstores and furniture stores and all of that. And so this picture to me represents a very misguided effort, and it was very, very sad to see what ensued. For decades there were blocks that were just empty after they tore down the downtown. And why you see some crazy one-way streets in Santa Clara was because they anticipated that they were going to have this huge, traffic demand, and so they re-engineered streets, they rerouted streets, made some streets one-way in anticipation of this huge flow of traffic that was going to be going to this new downtown. So here we are, 50 years later, still trying to recover from that and come up with a viable plan for a downtown.
Okay, now we didn't catch it on video right away, but pretend that you see this for the first time, and you had just started to talk about this.
Okay, so I just started to talk about this. So this is 410 Lafayette Way, and this has been a house that's been very contentious in the neighborhood because the owners want to remodel it, and the residents some of the residents have been in opposition. So when I look at this, I think about a lot of things, having been on the planning commission, knowing about a lot of Santa Clara's things like our zoning ordinance, very out of date, how we did a lot of one-offs. We had almost verged on having spot zoning. And one of the other things that I think about is that Santa Clara University does have a use permit with the city, and for 30 some years, that use permit wasn't revisited, and that was a time when the university was growing a lot. And one of the things that you can do in a use permit is put a limit on number of students and put a lot of other conditions. And Santa Clara didn't really do that. And so while the university was growing, from what I can tell from a distance, there wasn't much discussion about how to manage that student growth. And so a lot of that student growth went out into the neighborhoods. I have been a strong proponent and have worked very hard on a lot of issues. We're going to be bringing some information back to the Neighborhood University Relations Committee, because I chair that committee in addition to the Architecture Review Committee, where we're going to I've been trying to find ways that we can legally and fairly put legitimate restrictions on how many people can live in a house in areas that are not designed for multifamily housing. And for this house, what I felt like was that when it came to the Architecture Review Committee, there were limited areas that we were told to look at, whether the design had been altered. And at that time, I didn't feel like I had the ability to go and look and to re-question decisions that had been made at that point by the council and the Planning Commission. And I think a lot of it, too, was at the Architecture Review Committee, and even at the council. I mean, the council can look at things like land use, like what's the intended use. A lot of the objection that was coming up was that the fear that the owners were going to turn this into student housing. And my understanding of the law is that I don't know how I can prevent say to somebody, you can't make modification to your house because you may allow students to live in it. Because students, you can't discriminate against just because they're students. And, and I understand the angst. That's why I think the solution to what's happening in the neighborhoods isn't just to say you can't put a bedroom in a basement. It's got to be the things that we've been doing, like additional code enforcement, additional policing, telling the police department, please do not give students forewarnings before you cite them. We've increased the amount of the fines for certain administrative violations, such as noise and public consumption of alcohol, and those kinds of things. Working with the university to the fact that they have brought 20 houses that they own back under the control of the University Housing Office. That they have taken some homes that were going to be rented and made them available to their staff, which is also a need that they have because they have the same pinch on housing prices. And if we want to have really talented people teaching and working in various capacities in the university, they have to have a place to live too. They've put student ambassadors into the neighborhood. So when I see that, I want people to realize that there's not just one approach to solving a problem. And I know a lot of people were very unhappy with me about that decision, but we'll get
into that a little more in detail.
So that picture brings up a lot of thoughts.
All right, let's do one more picture and then we can move on. Are these okay? These fun?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
They're fun. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So that's City Center. So that, I think, represents a huge opportunity for Santa Clara. One of the things that I hear about from Santa Clarans is there's nothing to do in Santa Clara, no place to go. And, this is obviously extremely different from the old downtown that we have. It's at a very different scale. I think this represents a tremendous opportunity for Santa Clara. And, the first part that's going to be built is this part, the city center, which is retail, entertainment, restaurants, some hotels. And we're going to be having a new large park there that we're going to have a lot of fun designing. It's an opportunity to recover the funding that we lost when the RDA was disbanded. A lot of people didn't realize that $13 to $14 million a year went into the general fund. So I look at this and as I say about a lot of things, things are a challenge, but they are also an opportunity. I think it's going to be a big challenge, but I think that this will be a huge opportunity for our convention center, for our hotels. Great America is proposing a new master plan. We could finally have like the tourism destination area that we've talked about for decades. So I see this as a huge opportunity for Santa Clara.
All right, let's shift gears. I think that was plenty for the first of 3 parts of this interview. Second part, your pitch. Let's transition over to your pitch. Why? What are the top 2 most important things for you? Why should Santa Clara voters vote for you? I'm going to move the camera here since we're done with the computers with the screen here. So talk to me, Teresa, about why should Santa Clara voters vote for you? What are your top 2 issues? What are the things that matter to you most?
Well, I think first of all, I want to talk before we talk about issues. I think I bring a lot of the qualities that I hope make a good member of the council. That I am open. I don't make decisions before I get to council meetings. I do research. I listen to people. I make myself available. I believe that my personal demeanor is such that I can communicate well with staff. Because, whether we like it or not, the staff, God bless them, they're the ones that are actually going to have to implement 99% of what the council wants to do. So you've got to have a good working relationship with staff and give them good direction. I think I work well with other members of the council. They don't, you're not necessarily going to agree with everybody all the time, but if you bring to your whatever it is you're doing a certain style and respect for people, so I that respect spills over into how I address and listen to and care about what residents have to say, what the business community has to say. So I think my personal quality, I care a lot about this city. It is my home. I've dedicated a lot of my life to serving the community. I've made quite a number of personal sacrifices to serve this city. And I think I bring a level of competence. I think I understand a lot of issues on a number of different levels. I can go and talk, and I've been told this by a lot of groups, that they are surprised that I can be conversant on quite a number of issues. I believe that I am a person of integrity. I really work hard at that. I hold myself to a high standard of conduct. So I think for those reasons, I think from that perspective, I have been a good council member. And I think I have strength and of character and personality or whatever to go and pursue difficult topics. Some of the issues that we've been having with the Stadium Authority, that hasn't been easy. Some of the other changes that we need to make. I mean, sometimes you have to be willing to stand up and make a hard decision. We talked about that 410 Lafayette Way. That was very difficult for me because I feel the pain of a lot of those residents. But I had to do what I felt was right. And for me, at that time, what I thought was the just thing to do, and particularly in terms of the information that I had, and I made that decision solely based on what I thought was right at that time. The top issues that I'm concerned about are, we have so many things, we have so many great things in Santa Clara, but in terms of our government, we have a lot of things we need to fix. I believe that I've been part of the process to start making change, like in the ethics committee, starting the lobbyist ordinance, and right off the bat, we're having some issues there. But at least we're having those discussions. Calendaring, so people can see what it is who people are talking to and how are they spending their time. I started the governance committee. It's amazing a lot of the processes and just procedures and practices that aren't documented in Santa Clara, or they're in one of 5 different books that I've never seen somewhere. So there's that kind of the mechanics aspect of it. Having much more information posted on the website. We've all been frustrated for years. Still, somehow, things as seemingly simple as searching for data on the website. It's still difficult. The other thing, the major issues, is that, so in addition to the overall improvement of governance, is I think the other thing that I find that people find most compelling are the issues related to our general plan. And our general plan is kind of like the Constitution or the Bible of our city. And it encompasses things like, traffic, housing, parks, open space, what other facilities and services, the climate action plan. There's so many elements there. And I was on that general plan steering committee, and we were working on that plan when we were still in the Great Recession or whatever. And we tried to plan for what we thought a recovery was going to be. And part of the way that we gave ourselves some stopgaps in there was by having it be phased. But unfortunately, when the growth returned at a level that I don't think anybody anticipated, we didn't go back and do the review, the adjustments that we should have done. So I have been advocating for 2.5 years, and I think that that's a way that we can go back and pace development and go back and have a discussion with the community as to what we really want to see Santa Clara be. But I do think that people have to also, I'll be honest again and say to people, Santa Clara is changing, and it's not going to be the Santa Clara that it was when I was 3 and 4 years old and going to the movie theater holding the hand of my older brother. So it has changed, and we have to figure out how can we make it the best place to live with that change.
Okay, let's switch over to the questions then. I think you touched on a lot of things that I wanted to ask about, but I think that'll help me just go straight to the question without some of the background information. So let's talk about 410 Lafayette Way, right? So thank you very much for the explanation. I mean, it's I think you explained it very articulately. But I think one of the things that people are scratching their heads over, and I did get questions, so I did receive a lot of questions for different candidates, but for you, I did actually get this question. A lot of people are scratching their heads over this, despite the explanation that you gave either on council or the one that you just provided just a few minutes ago, as to you making the tough decision of what you thought was right, as to the process. Because 410 Lafayette Way went through so many hearings. I think the count was like at 9 or 10 or 11 by the time it was done. And then even there was probably some additional ones after it when there was some questions as to whether or not they had paid their fees. So the process, a very long process, and at the time after council had made the decision, before when you were out, and I know, as you've mentioned on council, your track record of attendance is probably second to none. So, the one time you were out, which was on city business, they discussed this. And when you came back at the next council meeting, there was a lot of angst or people who were upset as to the procedure for reconsidering that motion or reconsidering the decision on that motion. And at the time, the city attorney had mentioned that for there to be a reconsideration, we know the rules, that somebody who made the motion or voted in favor of the motion in the previous meeting would have to make the reconsideration. And I know you had brought it up. Obviously, somebody else had made the motion to reconsider. But one of the things that was brought up by the city attorney was that he had mentioned that there needed to have been new information presented that would constitute a reconsideration or constitute the need for a reconsideration. And I think a lot of people are questioning, was the reconsideration appropriate? Now, independent whatsoever as to what decision or how you felt or stood on the issue, right? And put aside the sensitivity or not to dismiss people's feelings towards the issue, but looking just at the process and really asking, if this had been another issue, would a reconsideration have been appropriate?
Well, so one of the things is, and I haven't looked at it for some months, but when that issue came up, I did my own research, and actually I could not find where it says that under a reconsideration you have to have new information.
I see.
And so I, mentioned that to the city attorney, and that was not, I don't know where he came up with that, because I could not find, and I could not find evidence that had been the city's past practice. And so, so my major concern, what I said, and if somebody could have answered me, because my main concern was, how then, I said, I wanted to understand then, how was I going to, go back to chair other architecture review committee meetings when there have been similar type issues, like, people can come twice a month to the architecture review committee meeting. Those similar issues are coming up all the time now. This one, what made this one, I think, particularly unique or volatile,
okay,
was the element of how many people might potentially live there, or the fact that they felt that it was students, that it was close to the university, and like I said, so that element. But so this same issue has been coming up repeatedly, and I've had discussions. Actually, I'm going to be meeting with staff this coming week because of some of my discomfort in some of our processes. And so that was my concern was...
Don't you think this opens the door? Sorry, I'm not interrupting you for time, but just part of the conversation thing. Don't you think this opens up the door of potential reconsideration? You can't do a reconsideration on a reconsideration, but does this open the door on reconsideration for more issues? I mean, it's just every time a council makes an issue, whether you're there or not, or whether you agreed with the decision or not, I mean, are we going to start seeing more reconsiderations? I mean, it's back to the question of process.
Well, so it's been a number of months since then. I don't think we've had any reconsiderations. I mean, but we are having a lot of appeals. There was appeal this past week of an architecture review decision. So I think part of the problem is there is a process problem, and I think that it's, once again, it's not to me, the issue is not really the reconsideration, because that's one of the, maybe there's been one or two reconsiderations in the 4 years that I've been on the council. I would say to people, let's go back and let's look at why are we having more appeals? And that was what was going on in that situation. There was appeal after appeal after appeal.
Yes.
So I would say, let's look at what's driving those appeals.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, what is driving those appeals? At least you're from. I mean, you have your coffee chats. You have a good pulse on the community. A lot of people trust to talk to you.
Yeah.
What are you feeling is? I mean, what's causing that?
Well, I think part of it is
water, maybe.
I think in other parts of the city, not so much the university area, there's the student issue, but all over the city, there's a couple of things that I see happening. That because of the cost of housing, more people are living in houses. So obviously, there's a particular issue about single-family homes, and then there's the whole density housing thing, which is a separate thing. But looking at single-family homes, I think almost everybody could say that in their neighborhoods, they're seeing where more people are living in houses. Either, like in my own situation, I have one of my brothers had to move back in with me. I still have living with me kind of a foster son that was a refugee from Sudan. In other, I know of other houses where every bedroom is rented to somebody else, a different person. So a lot of the discussions that came up even a couple years ago when I tried to get like a neighborhood protection ordinance, in part of the reason why of my the decision I was looking at with 410 Lafayette was a lot of what the legal issues that came out of that neighborhood protection ordinance process. So what I see is that people also, so there's kind of what I call an intensification in these single-family neighborhoods. And we have a lot of people who want to demolish completely, say homes that are 1,200 square feet, 1,500 square feet, and they're coming back and they want 3,000, 3,200. I've seen houses close to 4,000. I think this house that had an appeal had a basement, and if you included all the basement as square footage, living space, it was close to 5,000 square feet. So that seems to be a lot of the divide, is about how big a house can you have, what all can you do to it, and it's kind of like the individual versus the collective.
How do you strike a balance between a property owner's rights and the rights of their neighbors?
It's one of the most challenging things that I have to do, and if I'm still on council, or if somebody else is there in November, if somebody else wants to chair that committee, I'd be happy to pass it to them. Oftentimes I'll have people that will come in and they don't like the design that their neighbor has. And it's like, okay, that's maybe not your taste or my taste. I mean, how far do we go? We've put very general guidelines in place, but some people people become very it's like their personal belief system, and they get offended if you say your architecture is not in good taste, and that's very very challenging. Or we do work a lot. We kind of try to negotiate, like to bring down heights. And I've had people say, an 8-foot ceiling, that's old guard. I am trying to improve my neighborhood. They want 9-foot, they want 10-foot ceilings, they want all these things, and I literally have had to like referee fights almost between people, and it's kind of a different worldview. And so what we try to do is to come up with a middle ground. And I think it's becoming more problematic, and that's why I'm looking for, I'm still looking for answers, and we're going to bring some information to the NERC committee. I worked with the subcommittee of NERC for a number of months. We're going to still work on that issue, but we also have to figure out how much can you put restriction on somebody who wants to go from a 1,200 square foot house to 3,500 square feet. Mm-hmm. It's and like I said, the 410 Lafayette had the added problem of the fear of a lot of students, but similar things are happening all over the city.
Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little, because you talked about the Architecture Review Committee, you talked about Ethics Committee. How many committees are there within the city, just a rough ballpark? And more importantly, I want to kind of shift to how many committees are you on?
I would guess that there's probably over 30 committees. I haven't counted them all, 30 to 40, something like that.
Maybe not all of them are nearly as active as others. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, some of them only meet on a as-needed basis, like Facilities Naming Committee. Okay. Or there's a committee that looks at the salary for the police chief, the clerk, and the city manager. That meets once a year or something like that. Some of the committees are regional. Like it could be, like yesterday I was at the Treatment Plan Advisory Committee, and that's Santa Clara, San Jose, and a few other cities where we use the wastewater treatment plant. Sure. So like I'm on the VTA board.
Sure. So how many of them are you on?
Well, I didn't count them, but Suds Jane recently told me he counted them, and he said that I was on 23.
Okay. So, and I would assume that not all council members are on 23 committees.
That's right.
Do you feel that there needs to be a minimum number of committees that a council member should be signed up for?
It would be more optimal if it was more balanced. I mean, that was part of the reason, like I said, why I took that retirement package, was because we needed, we needed more help with the committees. I think I heard that the minimum that somebody has right now is 6. I guess it depends on the committee that's on. I would hope that we could find a way to balance it a little bit better.
Do you think? So one of the things that I didn't know much about, which I'm learning more about you today, is you're very passionate. You're very active. You want to be involved in a lot of things. 23 committees. I mean, and you have your nonprofit stuff. You have the regular council duties. Are you spreading yourself too thin?
I sometimes worry about that. I'm tired. I'm retired. I have not been, other than to go to power conferences and things like that. I haven't had a vacation.
Is that good for the city? I mean, for you to be spreading yourself thin, are you? I know it probably comes from a sense of passion and service, but are you maybe not doing as best as you could on these committees since that you're spread too thin on them?
That's possible. I mean, I'm more than happy once we get past the election if I should be on the council. Like I've said to the council members, if I don't get reelected, you're all going to have to do a lot more work. And not to say that they're not working.
Sure.
But I hope that we can do a rebalancing.
So do you think that should be kind of maybe you can talk about maybe part of the governance committee? Is that something that would be a mandate, or are you more in favor of just kind of a fair negotiation between everybody? And
I would rather see it be a collaborative process because everybody's personal situation is different, and part of the difficulty is that Santa Clara does have a part-time council.
Yeah.
And what's happened is that there's so many things that we need to work on in our city. And so the council's actually started more committees, like the governance committee and the marketing committee. And we've reestablished, like the school city liaison committee now meets every month because there's so many things we need to do. And so it is challenging, and we don't have a lot of staff. Santa Clara, I'm sure per capita, if we went, I know, once again, Suds went and counted up the planners. If you look at planning and some of our other departments, we have smaller staff than other cities. So that's one of the things that the voters need to decide or think about is, and I'm not advocating one way or the other, but like looking at how much you pay a council member and how much time do you want them to spend. As I said, not everybody was in a situation, and it's at a fair amount of personal sacrifice for myself that I left my job. And I believe that Kathy Watanabe is going to retire at the fully. She cut back her hours. The same thing, to try to be able to go to do a lot of this work. So ultimately, I think the community is going to have to decide what they want their council to be, and that's another discussion that has to happen.
So let's talk about the governance committee, because just recently in council there was the discussion around how items get put on the agenda, right? And not to talk about that as a specific issue, but one of the things, you look at the governance committee, you've been on that for what, a little over a year? Okay, so over that course of the year, what has come out of the governance committee aside from the how to get an item on the agenda?
Well, we've done things like, so we streamlined the whole agenda process. We're working on, there's now an RFP that's going to go out for a new system to do like an agenda building process. We have looked at a few items, and part of the issue is how much, which of the work gets done by staff and which of the work gets done by council members. And so some of the also there was a huge resistance at the beginning to making any of these changes.
So then council members then take it upon themselves to do it because staff is resisting, or what is it?
Well, and also other at the beginning there was resistance from a number of the council members.
I see.
And so we have had some changes. We have a different mayor. We have a different city manager. So some of the stuff that's gone on is that some of the internal tensions between various people on the council and also a different view, a different philosophy of how much input should a council member have, and what's the role of staff. So we're still kind of sorting some of that out.
So you would say that some of the, I guess you could say, inefficiencies or delay or slowness is due to some of the procedural stuff, or is it personality differentiation?
I think both of it.
Okay.
I think both of those would play into it. And things haven't been changing as fast as I would like. But I believe that we are trying to take on a different issue. Like this coming week, we're going to look at. There's been issues or concerns about the structure of the Citizens Advisory Committee and what its relationship should be to the city or not. So we're putting together a work plan, and I'm trying to get people to continue to have people move forward. And sometimes, as I said, there have been times when I get to a meeting, and then when I see what happens, and it's like people aren't prepared, or what deliverables that were supposed to be there aren't there, and I'm like, we're moving backwards, guys. We're not moving forwards. So,
but the reason I bring up the governance committee thing, and specifically the example that was just discussed at council, was here you spend a whole lot of time in the committee, and I believe you and Pat Golstad were on it, as you guys talked about in council, looking at how to get an item on the agenda, and probably spend a whole lot of time in your committee meetings discussing and debating and getting input from community members. And I know some community members have gone there and they've expressed that they had also provided input to the process, which I think is fantastic. But you spend a whole lot of time, and by the way, I'm speaking from experience as well, because it's similar to what happened with the Charter Review Committee, right? We spend a whole lot of time, and then it goes to council, and then in the matter of 20 minutes, 15 minutes, a lot of that work either gets undone or significantly changed. I mean, where do you strike the balance between spending so much time and trying to perfect something rather than just taking, getting yourself 80% of the way there, not being 100%, not being perfect, but you're 80% of the way there at 20% of the time versus going 100% of the
Well,
way.
I don't know. I understand the concept that you're saying, but I wouldn't say that 80-20 is what happened here. And that's going to happen. I think on anything, particularly now, I think everybody in the council is getting more engaged, and everybody's
Well, do you think it's
weighing
because of
in.
the election or just in general?
No, I think in general, I think the climate has changed, and I think people are realizing that there's where it's not a picnic in the park anymore. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be caught up. Like I said, Santa Clara had a lot of, particularly in terms of how its council interacts with staff, or a lot of these processes didn't exist, no definition. And so it was kind of like, and who knows, maybe that's a better way to do it. Who gets what they want through sheer force of personality or will.
So do you because you talked about this, right? The example that you brought up was the Kylie development, right? Where you were on planning commission at the time, 7-0, 7 unanimously voted from planning commission to go against the development, and then council approved it. So the question is, because whether it's the committees or commissions and like you're saying, getting stuff done through sheer force of personality, do you see that these commissions or committees are more ceremonial in nature when at the end of the day the council just decides what they want to do anyways?
And actually what I would like to see us do,
where do you draw the delineation of delegation and authority and trusting the commissions or committees that have already been tasked to do something?
Well, and I think that some of that gets into a whole other thing, which is like the council having a goal, a strategic plan, a strategic outlook for the city, and having goals and objectives and that flow from that in a logical fashion. And then you kind of have a sense of, okay, Cultural Commission, this is kind of where we think we're going, and go do it. I fully believe, having spent a lot of time on nonprofits, in school district or the city or church or whatever it may be, that do not waste a volunteer's time. Empower that volunteer. We have many talented people. I was just speaking to somebody today at an event at Santa Clara University about, even though we have a lot of things we'd like to do in terms of cultural events and fun things to do in Santa Clara, that even with 7 members on the Cultural Commission, that's not enough. I said, so we've got to get more people involved in that. And it's not just the council, it's not just the 7 people but it's larger groups of people out there to achieve all that we'd want to do. I'm a big believer in giving some broad direction, and like I said, do not waste a volunteer's time. If it's only ceremonial, let them know that. And I've seen people, quit and leave commissions, and I get the sense it's like, this has not been a good use of my time. And I don't like that at all. And that there's a couple other commissions I think we need to look at. And now the mayor has started as having getting together on a monthly basis with one of the commissions. And I think that's some of what we've got to do.
So do you cut the commissions, or do you...
No, you empower them.
Okay, so you empower them, or you figure
find
out
a way to
delegate.
empower them.
Okay. I'm going to crank up the hot seat a little bit here. Spectrum of people, right? So imagine a spectrum. On the extreme right, you have somebody who, because we're talking about personalities, right? On the one extreme, you have somebody who is very dictator-like, and they do what they want. There's no input, and what they say is the final word. And on the extreme left, you have somebody who tries to please everybody and doesn't get anything done because they're trying to get consensus from everybody, and obviously people have different opinions. Where do you see yourself on that spectrum?
I'm probably... So you said right is dictatorial?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
So I'm a little bit more towards, I'll say this about my nature, a little bit more towards the pleaser side, from the center side. But that's definitely not all of who I am. And most people, they see me, I'm short, I'm older, I wear glasses, I'm a little bit of eccentric, I ride my bike. And they think that I'm kind of a softie. Well, in a lot of ways I am, but I've also spent a lot of time in business and worked on with very big companies, and I can be pretty tough if I have to be,
sure.
and when it is appropriate. And ultimately, and I've had people, not be happy with me on certain things when I've said I'm sorry. We have to draw the line. Even at the Architecture Review Committee, after a while, it's like, okay, this group we're not going to come to consensus. Committee, let's decide here. We're the ones here that have to, where the rubber meets the road, and we're the ones that have to make the decision. So I can see when we're getting there, or when we've gotten there, and I'm willing to make those decisions. I do believe in collaboration and trying to find common ground, because then I think you have a much stronger position that people buy into. If you try to cram something down somebody's throat all the time, that they're not going to really be engaged with it, and at the first opportunity, either they won't do anything to support it, or they will undermine. So I would say I'm a little bit towards the softer side, the collaborative side, but I think that there are members of the council who will tell you that when it was needed, I've
heard that. I think it's talking more about when do you decide? Like you mentioned in architectural, I haven't been to an architecture review committee to see that, but when do you decide that you need to cut your losses and swing more from the left more to the right, where you just need to make a decision and move on?
Well, right. I think some of that is almost the intuitive. I always tell people I don't know if I'm an analytical intuitive or intuitive analytical. Some of that you have to read people. You have to look and say, wait, is any new data being presented? Are we making any constructive progress here? If not, we're spinning wheels and spending cycles that we're not moving, and it's at that point it's destructive. And it's not good to like almost give people false hope, like you're going to convince me here, or you're going to win out, because ultimately in some of those decisions the council is the one who has been under the charter, has been given the authority, and that's where you have to be willing to stand up and say, you may not like it, but I'm making a decision.
Can you give me an example?
410 Lafayette Way.
Okay. You mentioned you're riding on your bike, so I'm gonna shift gears to this one. Oh, sorry, no pun intended. Measure B. So I think it was in the chamber pack video, you had come out and actually in council as well, that you're on the VTA board and you supported it. Yet a few meetings ago, there were several members from the public who came to speak against Measure B, not just this last meeting, not the one with people members of the public, but from a few meetings ago, we did have I think 3 or 4 people who came to speak against Measure B because it didn't adequately provide for bikers' needs. So, and we know you're a champion of biking and alternative transportation. How do you reconcile the two? What do you say to those people?
I would say that there's more money in this measure for bike ped improvements than in any program we've ever seen before. This is our chance to really start making some significant...
Is it where it needs to be?
No, but once again, is anything perfect? Would I have rather have seen, do I really like that we're still going to put money into highways? I'm not, I would have rather that we didn't do that, but I have to face the reality that right now, and it's for people's information, it's not to widen highways, it's the interchanges. Would I have rather have seen more money in bike ped and some development of some of these alternative transportation methods? Yes. But it's like, to get everybody on the bus, that measure is trying to meet a lot of different needs. There are still many, many, many people in this community who just don't think that anybody's going to take any other transportation other than driving, and that the bike ped solutions are very limited. And so, in order to get buy-in from those folks, you can't just say, all we're going to do is bike ped, or all we're going to do is personal rapid transit, or some of these other ideas. So one of the things that I like to say is politics is the art of incremental change. And I believe that I'm somewhat of an idealist, but I'm also have to be pragmatic. Like, I need to move the ball down the field here, to use a good football analogy.
Sure.
And so if I have to, move that ball down the field, I'm going to get some gain today, and then I'm going to be looking, where can I make my next gain? Or if I move here, can I leverage something there? So if I may, and people will cringe. One of my former bosses was somebody by the name of Carly Fiorina, and she went on and she lived. Actually, I kind of thought she got a bad rap at HP to some degree, but when she left, I take no responsibility for any views that she espoused politically once she left HP. Well, one time I was in an employee meeting and she said something, and I thought, this is pretty smart, this is pretty wise. And an employee asked her, well, why are we doing this? I thought this was our strategy. I thought this is where we were going. And she said, well, okay, she says, I like to sail. She said, I love boats. And, when you're going to set your course for where you're going to sail, you think where it is the direction that you're going to go. She says, most of the time, you don't sail in a direct line there. Mm-hmm. She says, you're looking at the wind, you're looking at the currents, you're looking at a lot of things, and you're going to go over here, and then you're going to tack, and then you're going to read again, and you're going to tack. But she says, you're always keeping your eye on what your ultimate destination is. But so I have thought about that a lot, that you may sometimes have to go in different directions and tack to keep moving towards what your goal is. And people may not be as happy about the rate at which you get there, but you keep moving towards the goal.
Let's talk about Blue Pack for a minute.
Okay.
So you were there at the press conference last week where Stand Up came to speak about Blue Pack. But you weren't named in either the quote-unquote bad or quote-unquote good people list. So you weren't named. Now, I'm going to hold the rule here, but just mention, one of your opponents was listed on the list, and they're receiving over $12,000. So, you clearly feel about Blue Pack because you were at the press conference, and I think you were standing with other members of council or former members of council who were coming to speak out against Blue Pack. Tell me about Blue Pack.
So the first thing I heard of it, I was at a neighborhood meet and greet, and a friend of mine. Sorry,
I'm going to interrupt you because this video is about to stop. So let me stop and then start again. Ready?
Okay, so the first I heard about Blue Pack was I was at a neighborhood meet and greet, and a friend of mine said that he had been doing some internet searches for one of the council members that's running for re-election. I don't think me, and this something from Blue Pack popped up, and so he went and looked, and then he and another one of my friends then did some checking around, and within some hours they found information at the Secretary of State. So that's how I first heard about it. I just like everybody else in town, I had heard rumors that they maybe was going to be independent in expenditures done. Expenditures that are not subject to the city's campaign ordinances to benefit certain candidates.
Is that illegal though?
No, that's not illegal.
So,
there are certain disclosure requirements that I'm not. I'm not up on all the real fine points, but I know if you cross certain thresholds of spending, the disclosure requirements increase. And I know one of those thresholds is $50,000. And I believe from the forms that I saw that the total expenditures from Blue Pack,
it's just under,
just came, whatever, they made a donation to another group, and that group was going to spend money, and it was just under the threshold. So I kind of went, it almost makes you think that somebody did that on purpose to avoid having to make further disclosures as to the source of the money. So, like I said, I prefer that people be upfront, and if anybody who has a view about candidates, pro or con, that they just use their voice, social media, whatever, to do that, and openly, like all the ads you see on television, most of them say, I'm Donald Trump and I approve this ad, or I'm Hillary Clinton and I approve this ad, or say paid for by, whatever group it is. So I prefer that people do it that way. But under the rulings of the Supreme Court, which is one that I don't like, that those are considered free speech provisions. But I do think that, as I said, it's rather duplicitous. I just think, like I said, I would prefer the people, if you've got an issue with somebody, just come directly confront them on it or say it, not send text messages unsolicited to people, and don't make aspersions as to somebody's potential illegal or immoral behavior.
Let me ask you a hypothetical question here. If you had been one of, again, you are the same person, considering everything you just said. If you had been the recipient of the independent expenditures, even though you might not have wanted it, what would you have done? What could you have done?
Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, I feel for the folks that are getting the expenditures on their behalf. Most of them have said that they have had no connection.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel for them because now they're feeling like they're being painted with a brush that they, didn't choose. So if it was me, I wouldn't like it either. Like I said, I think we should just all play. In the last 4 years ago.
But certainly, if you had very strong convictions that what they were doing was wrong and you were receiving funds, wouldn't you come out? You can't stop them from spending the money.
But I could disavow it.
Sure.
I mean, I 4 years ago, I was on the other end. I had close to like $80,000 spent against me. For money that was channeled to my primary opponent at that point. And so I felt the frustration. And
but it's easy when which I think in this scenario is happening also because one of your opponents is receiving some of the independent expenditure, for you to speak out against it, or to stand up against it, or to disavow it. But it's different if you were the recipient of it, even when you didn't want it.
Yeah, so I don't know what I'd be honest. I'm not sure how much you can do. Like I said, I've heard a couple of the people, Dr. Nadeem for one, and I think John McLemore both of them, I believe, have said that they had nothing to do with this, that they don't know what group this is, and like I said, that they're just specifically name them because I've seen comments that they feel that they are being put in like with some nefarious group that's trying to manipulate the election. So I would urge, as I said, I'll say it. I would urge whoever's behind it to stop. And if you have something to say, come out in public and say it, and don't hide behind text messages and a phone and fake phone surveys and all that. And I can only, John's been a friend of mine for a long time. I have to believe him. I know Dr. Nadeem quite well. I believe him.
Okay, let's shift gears here, and I think I only have a couple more questions, and 3 more questions, and then we'll wrap up. Talk to me again, without talking specifically about any individuals. Talk to me about the Santa Clara City Council seat system. So, seat 4 saw a candidate shuffle this cycle, and it certainly affected seat 7. So you've seen that impact. And it's even aside from this election cycle, the candidate shuffle has happened in the past.
Yeah.
So tell me about your thoughts on the seat system.
Okay, so back when I mentioned when I was on the school board and I stepped down because I didn't like the way the system was, the system that was in place at the school district and still is. Even before I was on the council, I was advocating and getting information and trying to get the council. I went to the then ethics committee to talk about having an alternative system. And at first I thought that maybe just getting rid of the numbered seats would help. I think that would help a little bit. That would be better. I still don't think that's satisfactory enough. 4 or 5 years ago, I was the vice chair of a charter review committee that was only looking at election methods. So we spent quite a bit of time looking at a wide variety of methods. And actually at that time, there was almost no support on that committee to go to a district system. There was interest, as I was interested, in looking at an alternative system, like ranked choice or proportional. There's some different models.
Sure.
And at that time, and so the committee was actually pretty interested in that. And the registrar of voters came and talked to the committee. and talked about that at that time they had system constraints. The system that they had couldn't handle the software that you would need to make that able to happen, and it would be too laborious to do it by hand. And so they said, well, maybe Santa Clara will put in a few $1 million. And so when it went to council, they weren't, interested in putting up the money. And I don't necessarily blame them. They were kind of like, why should we fund the experiment for the whole county? Mm-hmm. And there wasn't very much follow through about, a couple of times I asked, well, where's going on? And, where are we? Can we, look at that? And then you were obviously on the Charter Review Committee this time. And I think that the committee looked at and said that was going to be such an intensive discussion and would need a lot of time that would, based on the time frames for this election cycle, that it couldn't be completed. So based on the fact that I don't know that there's enough neighborhoods that have like a concentration of people of a certain ethnicity or group. Based on that, I would like to see, and if I'm on the council, I will advocate and propose that we reconvene a charter review committee, and that, and I've said this, all along this year, that we ask the committee or maybe a new committee to go back and to look at those methods again. And because my understanding is that the Registrar of Voters Office has had an infusion of some millions of dollars to make a lot of improvements, and my understanding is that they now could handle having a different type of system. Mm-hmm. So that would be what I think that's the direction we need to go.
What generation of Santa Claran are you? Third, fourth?
Oh, no.
Second?
I mean, well, so depending on how you count it. So
sure.
My dad grew up in Burlingame. My mother grew up in Washington.
Okay.
So I mean, so my dad, he lived in.
So you pretty much grew up here, but you're not like a third, fourth, fifth generation.
No.
Okay.
No.
Then I'm gonna skip that question and reserve it for somebody else. I'm asking that question to people who've been here for some time. All right. Let's final set of questions here. Measure O. So we wanted to talk about this. It's a council salary increase from what it is currently to council members getting $2,000, mayor getting $2,500, and a salary setting commission that would every 2 years adjust council salaries either up or down with a cap, 10% cap on the up and a no floor on the down. Mm-hmm. Yes or no?
I'm gonna say no, because I think that the initial salary should have been a little lower. I think that's a little. It's the jump is a little bit much for people to absorb at this time.
Do you think you think that you would still say no, despite there being a salary setting commission that might adjust even after that initial jump happens? That the salary setting commission might decrease it if they feel like it might be higher or might be too high.
I hadn't thought about it that way.
I don't know if it's likely or not likely that a salary setting commission would decrease it on their first, convened meeting. But I mean, or do you think that this is just a service job and people should be willing to, just serve at no cost? Obviously, they're getting, council members and mayor are getting some amount of money now.
Yeah. Basically, even to be honest, the amounts of money that are being proposed, nobody could live on that. I mean, so it's not a full-time job. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things is that for the amount of committees, like you were pointing out, all the committees, my fear is that we will increasingly have a council that's either retired. I retired because of this. Mm-hmm. Kathy Watanabe is retiring because of this. Or people who either don't have, Debbie's is, her husband works full-time. Or you've got retired people. So I worry that you either are going to have people who do not have to work, or they are retired, and that the other groups that they're say like someone like Dominic Caserta. To be fair to Dominic, he's a teacher and he has a lot of constraints on when he can get out during the day to go to these meetings, and he also teaches at night. So it's kind of like. So he has constraints on when he can go, but it's the larger discussion of, I don't think, even though actually one of my opponents said a few years ago to me that he thought that Santa Clara needed full-time council members. I don't know that our community would accept that. I just think that they think I think that somewhere there's a little bit of a middle ground.
So back to Measure O. I mean, does that meet the middle ground, or is it still not adequate, or do you think that it is not something that the community would swallow?
I think the community still is going to have, they'll see it as too much of a jump.
Okay. Measure P. Measure P is about term limits. So right now we have what you could say pseudo-term limits, where you can't serve more than 2 consecutive terms, but as long as you set out for 2 years, or you in a different office for 2 years, your limits have been effectively reset. Right. And Measure P would seek to change that to 2 terms for either council and 2 terms for mayor, if you choose to be mayor, for life.
I support it, and I think that, once again, we were talking about commissions and committees. I think if we do a good job of empowering those commissions and developing people and give them challenging work to do, you're in part preparing them to run and to be on the council at some point. And I think we've been doing a lot better job of bringing people into the committee, commission, board process, where before we had times when I was the first year or so I was on the council, we had times when we had to postpone appointments. We had no applicants. Mm-hmm. So I think the argument that there's only a very few number of people who can serve effectively as a council member, that's kind of, to me, bogus. We have an incredibly talented populace, and if we do these things like give our people more meaningful things to do on their commissions, that they'll be even more ready to step up to be on the council.
Mm-hmm. So yes on P.
Yes on P.
Okay. Measure Q is how we how council fills a vacancy either on council or mayor or chief of police or city clerk in the event that somebody resigns or is no longer chooses to serve. Currently, the way it happens is council has the option within 30 days to appoint somebody to fill the vacancy, and it's with a simple majority. And if they choose not to, then it would go to the voters either in a special election or to a general election at the will of the council, which election it would go to. And the new Measure Q would propose a new system where if council chooses within 30 days to appoint somebody, it's not a simple majority. They would have to have a supermajority. And the impetus behind that is that you don't pick a divisive candidate. You pick somebody who is more consensus building in the case of a split council. And that whether or not they appoint whoever, even if they do appoint somebody, that person would go up to the next general election, so that the voters have a say in who's serving them.
So I support that. I mean, it wasn't one of my real burning issues, but I what I find interesting about Santa Clara is that somebody currently serves to the end of the term rather than to the next general election. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is very much an improvement on that. And, it could be, by having the supermajority at the level that it's at, and unless almost you've got a unanimous opinion, it'll probably go to election, Mm-hmm. So I think that's that's more in keeping with what's happening in, a lot of the surrounding cities.
Okay. Measure R. Measure R is the okay. So let me explain it to people who are watching the video. Measure R is the measure to protect open spaces and parks in Santa Clara from its use or designated use from being changed without a 2/3 majority vote by voters in a general election.
Right. So I support that. It's very different than the measure that's being proposed in Sunnyvale, which I could see. I think that could cause some havoc. So this is, I think, a much more measured approach, and we're really focused on lands that are being used for parks or open space. I have had discussions with any number of people who have used the term shovel ready when referring to Ullastack Preserve, and they say, well, it was never intended to be a preserve or an open space. It was meant to be developed, and I guess a couple of projects failed. And I'm like, well, good for us. That I guess in a way it was good that it failed, and now we're able to, we're trying to recreate the Santa Clara Valley in a relatively small piece of land, so we have some sense of what it was like. I mean, I have the stories of my parents to talk about, And I have memories of what the Santa Clara Valley was like, at the mid-century point when it had already gone to orchards. But that's a chance to see what it was like in the, before the arrival of the Europeans. And, the issue with the youth soccer park and all that. So I think by looking at what's in our general plan, which is a publicly adopted document, or the ability to modify by ordinance, I think it's a very reasonable approach. And it doesn't, I think the fact that it's a 2/3 requirement.
Do you think that's appropriate, that it should be a 2/3 and not necessarily a simple majority, or maybe like a 55% or?
Well, it's different. I have advocated for lower percentages on things like bonds for, schools and things like that. I think we're in such a deficit situation on open space and parklands in Santa Clara that I think it should be a higher threshold. So I think the 2/3 is reasonable in this situation. If we if we weren't the lowest ranked city on acres of open space per 1,000 residents of any city in the county, maybe I'd feel differently. But I think we've got a long way to go to improve that situation.
Mm-hmm. Final thoughts. It's open mic for you.
Well, thank you, Hosam. I want to thank you for all the dedication that you've been showing by all the time that goes into setting up these interviews and talking to us and thinking of the questions and the very creative use of the visuals and all of that. So my thoughts are that I hope Santa Clara knows that I care a lot about our city. I care about them, that I'm trying to find a very measured approach to finding solutions that will lead to a better Santa Clara for everybody, that I don't expect that people will agree with me on everything, because I love my parents, but I didn't agree with them on everything, or people love their spouses and you don't agree with them. But I hope that you would look at that I spend a time to listen to you, to study issues, to come up with solutions, and that overall, that more than perhaps a single issue, definitely more than a single issue, or even perhaps a handful of issues, that you would look at the approach that I take to trying to be someone who's serving you as part of your governance team, and that the approach that I bring is that approach that you would want, so that all the council, and that we could truly build collaboration between the council members, the staff, and most importantly, the community. So I would ask for people's support based on I hope what they know, and perhaps through this interview know a little bit more about me and how I will conduct myself in the next 4 years.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for sitting with us. And I guess, I don't know if it's looking at me. It's
Yes.
Probably good enough. Okay, so that wraps it up for Teresa's interview. And again, I wish this was live streamed. It's not, unfortunately. We'll have to try to figure out a better place for interviews after today, because I think the live stream would be pretty cool for people to watch us live. In any case, I appreciate everybody's patience. As we're doing this for the first time, so you're kind of going through the growing pains along with me and everybody else who's and especially the candidates' patience for having to deal with almost like 2 hours of questions. So I appreciate everybody's time, and Teresa, thank you for your time, and I hope everybody who's watching this video found it useful. And I have to now jump to another interview, so I'm going to shut this video and then launch up another one. So thank you again, Teresa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hosam.
Bye.